to a very special episode of Mr. Tain's Time Tunnel. Today we want to look at the history of puppets on television. Now a TV is like a puppet stage. The characters are limited to a very small area. I did puppet shows for Sunday school for over 30 years. In the 1980s, puppet skits were a very popular part of Sunday school curriculums, and high-quality puppets were ready-made for such curriculums. Now, at one point, I bought one of those puppets for myself. It's a changeable puppet. You can put different eyes, different nose on it, different hair, and they can be several kind of people. I could put a long hair wig on this puppet and make it female. But the most memorable character I probably ever made was a guy named Slug. He was a rough-edged character, and I think we will do today's episode with the character of Slug.
Let's watch TV! Now, one of the first puppets to appear on TV was a string puppet called Howdy Doody. He was a string puppet, also known as a marionette, and the show had a host and a clown. In the 1960s, a guy named Jerry Anderson over in England kicked it up a notch. Not only did he use marionettes, but they had electromechanical things inside of them so that they looked more realistic. And then he used all kinds of electric gadgets to make props and ships and jets and all kinds of cool stuff. Thunderbirds was the most popular show Jerry Anderson ever made. Man, it was cool! It was not only in color, but his special technology was called, wait for it, Super Marionation! I think he used some pyrotechnics too. Now before we go any further, let's talk about puppets versus clowns. Kids seem to love Clarabelle the Clown on the Howdy Doody show, even when he did things like that. And kids all over the country liked another famous clown named Bozo. And they loved to be in the studio audience with both of these clowns. But when that same generation grew up, they made cartoons about clowns that were a little less than flattering. Like Binky the Clown on the Garfield cartoon.
Binky the Clown Show. Have a nice day.
Binky was very obnoxious, but it gets worse. Now, as you can see in this episode of The Tick, made in the 1990s, clowns could be very scary.
Perhaps I could reason with it.
And they all looked like Bozo.
Happy? You know, you really pack a wallop.
Look what happens to this obnoxious drunk clown in the movie Uncle Buck. Now it could be that clowns should have stayed under the big top on a stage far away from the audience. It could be that having a clown right up in your face, looking you in the eye, right in your living room, might have been a little bit overwhelming for some of those baby boomers. Eventually, Clarabelle stopped clowning around, dressed up in a coat with big pockets, called himself Captain Kangaroo, and just acted like a really nice guy, and brought us the immortal puppets, Mr. Moose and Bunny Rabbit. Kukla, Fran, and Ollie dominated television for decades, even on different networks. Fran is the nice lady on the right. Local TV stations used to make their own kid shows. This was from Channel 5 in Ames, Iowa in the 1950s. It was called House with the Magic Window, and it was the longest running local children's show in America. And guess what was in the magic window? Puppets! Just 30 miles away in Des Moines, a puppet with floppy ears named, well, Floppy, was what Channel 13 was most known for. And the kids never got tired of watching him. The most popular kids show in Minneapolis in the 1950s featured a guy and two puppets that were nothing but the arm of a dog and a cat. Soupy Sales tried the same trick on his show, and it seemed to work for him too. Families all over the country watched Sherry Lewis and her puppets Lamb Chop, Hush Puppy, and Charlie Horse. Kids watched it because the puppets were fun. Mothers watched the show because they thought Lamb Chop was cute. Fathers watched the show because they thought Sherry Lewis was cute. Oh yeah. Now I would be remiss if I didn't mention the Fab Three, Alvin and the Chipmunks. Now I can hear Generation Z saying, "No slug, Alvin and the Chipmunks was a CGI computer-generated image movie, not puppets." And I can hear millennials saying, "No slug, Alvin and the Chipmunks was a cartoon in the 80s. I watched it when I was a little kid." And I can hear baby boomers saying, "No slug, Alvin and the Chipmunks was a cartoon in the 60s. I watched it when I was a little kid."
Alvin!
Alvin and the Chipmunks appeared on the Ed Sullivan Show in 1958 as puppets. The cartoons came later. Once upon a time, there was a TV network called NET. And nobody ever watched it except kids in school, because the school teacher would roll a TV into the classroom on an AV cart and make them watch educational programs. But that changed when the Corporation for Public Broadcasting brought in the Puppet Broadcasting Service. The people at the Children's Television Workshop knew that if they put puppets on TV, then kids would watch public educational TV after school, when they didn't have to. Sesame Street featured a whole menagerie of puppets. Mr. Rogers used puppets too. Now in the 1970s, puppets came to Saturday morning TV to compete with cartoons. At least I think those are puppets. I haven't made up my mind yet. They might just be costumes. Poor kid looks like he's in a haunted forest, but he seems okay with the idea. Hey, don't get too close to Puffin stuff when he's hungry, kid. With a mouth that big, he can swallow you in one gulp. Now, in the late 1970s, some of the Muppets from Sesame Street came to prime time, and it was called The Muppet Show, and it was the greatest TV show ever made, because the Muppets were even funnier when they weren't trying to teach you anything. These guys were my favorite. Now puppets brought unity to television networks. You see, the Muppets went from PBS to CBS, even though they were still on PBS. And then when CBS was done with Captain Kangaroo, PBS wanted him. And his puppets, of course.
Hey, you won't believe how many things there are to do. You could go skating in the park.
And eventually, PBS brought back Sherry Lewis and all three of her famous puppets. After several successful years on Sesame Street, some of the writers wanted to address the subject of Bert and Ernie's orientation. Well, let me address that subject a little bit as a puppet myself. Surprise! Puppets don't have orientation!
Well, I hope you enjoyed this little documentary about the history of puppets on the screen. Did you enjoy it, Slug?
Well, the lighting could have been better.
What do you mean?
Well, the lighting's perfect now that you're in the picture.
Well, Slug, you were in front of a flat screen TV. You were backlit. It was all we could do to keep you from being just a silhouette. And besides, you weren't perfect either. And what you said about NET, nobody watching it in the evening, that wasn't very nice. And what you said about PBS, Puppet Broadcasting Service, really?
You mean that's not what the P stands for?
No, it stands for Public Broadcasting Service. Did you ever learn to read?
Reading isn't my strong suit. I kind of bullied my 4th grade teacher into giving me a passing grade.
Oh, and that reminds me, there is another video on this channel that features Slug. It's called Mission is Possible.
Yeah, and it's got the highest number of views of anything M.R. Tain has put on this channel. Multiple times as many views as all of his other puppet videos. Or any videos, including the one where he's a talking head. Oh, and by the way, did I ever tell you you're a lousy ventriloquist?
Never claimed to be a ventriloquist, just a puppeteer.